Welcome back to our research series on human-centric robotics. In this series, we are exploring the uncharted, wild step lands of robotics, where robots are designed to work alongside humans, with humans, and for humans. This week is the first week of June 2025, and I'm coming to you from the Parsley Bay in Sydney, Australia. Because this week is the first week of June, we are starting the winter season. But as you can see, it doesn't feel like winter in Sydney. It's usually the case in Sydney. We get bright sun, clear sky, not like the northern hemisphere winter with cold and snow. So traditionally, in traditional robotics, we usually see humans and we write algorithms to detect a human as an object, as an obstacle, and usually when we see a human in an image, the robot identifies the human as a bounding box with coordinates around it, which is really reducing the complexity and the depth of a human into a coordinate space, which is actually quite valid because when you want to design a path planning or obstacle avoidance, sure, you can consider humans as being obstacles in the environment. But that's not the case in human-centric robotics because humans are much more than that. Humans interact with each other with intuitiveness, with emotions, and with cultural values. Therefore, human-centric robotics comes into place to address that interaction, to capture the interaction in the robotic manner, and use that kind of depth and much more rich information in designing decision-making algorithms. So one example I would say in human-centric robotics would be about identifying a human, not just a source of information, but also a source that generates knowledge. And what is knowledge? Well, knowledge is simply defined as an information that's been applied. And human is a walking source, moving source of an knowledge. In traditional robotics, a robot can identify the distance of that object to the robot and all sorts of features. That's, of course, quite valid, quite useful, but those are just the features about an object. And in that sense, the traditional way of computer vision, for example, the YOLO algorithm or the algorithm of faster RCNN, could do pretty well job in identifying, labeling a human, a cat, or a dog from each other, and then making that confident predictions with accuracy. But with looking with just traditional way of solving that, what happens there is the level of human is reduced into just an accuracy level. The information is lost. And what happens is it's not just about a lack of accuracy or lack of information, it's actually misinterpreting what a human really is. And I would say in human-centric robotics, the true essence of human centricity is actually avoiding misunderstanding of a human. And one aspect of it is not just look at a human as an obstacle, but look at a human as a source of knowledge, information to learn, and adapt. Well, let me give you an example in traditional robotic applications of making a decision. For example, imagine a robot that is a servant in a restaurant. You, as a customer, you enter to the restaurant and you will be greeted with a robot. And the robot will guide you to the spot where you can sit, and to the empty spot where you can sit, and you can order some food. Well, the traditional manner in traditional robotics, obviously, we can program a robot to do those kind of decisions, to find out the empty spot in a restaurant and guide the new customers to that empty table to sit. But what happens in an actual human being a servant in a restaurant is that the human, as a servant, looks at the customers are the humans as well, and having an empathy towards the customers can guide to the empty table. But it's not just about guiding and identifying which table is an empty table. It's actually adapting to the situation, to the condition of the customer. Let's say if the customer is not quite happy with the emotions, with the expressions, while going towards the empty table, then the servant can make a new decision, or can adapt, can change its decision based on that knowledge about the customer. And then that's how the emotional aspect and an empathy aspect comes into place of making a decision, adapting, syncing with the customer in that situation. What is the reason of having that? The reason is because the servant, as a human servant, looks at emotional aspects of a human and social aspects of a human, and adapts the decision based on those elements. Because the servant is considering human as not only an obstacle or optimization problem solving, but also looks at a human as a source of information to confirm, to satisfy the emotional and societal needs, and to gain trust as well. Well, another example I would say is in traditional robotics, what happens is the level of an information about the human is reduced to the body or the object level. The subjectivity of a human is reduced to the object level. It's like, imagine, look at this water, right? You can see, and when I look to this water, to the beach side, I don't see just H2O molecules, right? It's not about my vision. I don't see water as an H2O, or I don't just, as a human being, I don't classify water as an H2O. But what I do is I look at the dynamics, I look at the motion, I look at the reason of the water, and then how that water interacts with the environment. That's how I make a decision as a base. That's my base of my making a decision. Oh, look at that rock. Yeah, it's pretty spectacular. I'm in Parsley Bay. I'll walk on that bridge as well in the video today. So when I look to the environment, the reality is actually the continuously changing flux. It is not just molecules and objects standing there labeled. As a human, I look at those objects, things, as not just to label them, or not just to get the distance of those things around me, but the base of my making a decision is based on the reality that I am in. So how do I interpret that? How do I adapt and sync with the reality? That's the base of me making a decision. And in that base, not only functional needs of my functional needs are the main objective to be satisfied, but also there is an emotional and societal need. Let me give you an example. Imagine a robot that you design a robot, and that robot has to navigate around the crowd and without colliding with the crowd. So you could obviously say with a traditional robotic case, traditional robotic algorithms, you can think of every human in that crowded environment as being obstacles, and you can detect the exact location in the image, or you can transfer that image into the XYZ domain of space and make a path planning algorithm without collision. But the question I want to ask you is that the way we navigate around people? Is that the way we try to go to the destined target location? Well, I would say it is not the baseline. I would say the baseline is about social interactions. The baseline is about having an empathy towards each individual or the crowds of individuals in the environment. So when I walk in the crowd, I don't just try to avoid, oh, it's just water. Anyway, so as you can see, when we see the reality from humans' perspective is completely different than the way we traditionally look at solving problems. Therefore, it directly applies to human-centric robotics, because human is in the center of that equation. And then when we want to design robots that work alongside humans, with humans, and for humans, the alongside humans doesn't mean that robot has to avoid collisions with humans as a label, but it has to adapt, sync with the social environment of humans around. Or when we say robots that work with humans, we don't say that robot does certain job and human does certain job, but it's about syncing together, being a collaborators, being a team together. Therefore, the fundamental part that needs to be started with is not about object avoidance algorithms to start with in robotics. It's not about object detection algorithms to start with, but it is the point, the concept of a human. Who is the human? That's where is required to be started with in human-centric robotics. So for last 2 years, I was working in this field of human-centric robotics, and it's a quite new field for me as well. Therefore, I spend quite amount of time on understanding, reading some books in human science, in psychology, and even looked up some journals, some papers on social science. Why? Because I knew that humans were much more than just an object. I knew that, and obviously you know as well, it's a common sense that to say so, but what do I mean by that is not just about labeling it as it is, but actually trying to get an algorithm, the mathematical solutions that adapts, that aligns with human-centric view. These are the fig trees in Parsley Bay. They are quite fascinating and beautiful, aren't they? Therefore, it's kind of interesting and fascinating to look from the human-centric view, because it's something new not to me, not to you, but something new to the field of robotics, because the reality is different. I'm not a person who believes in just one constant reality. The perspective matters in defining the reality. And from the perspective, what do I mean by that? Is not just the objects in the environment, is not just molecules. The reality is the flux. How do they interact with each other? How the physical bodies interact, adapt, sync, and act in the environment. So it's a dynamic flux that defines the reality, not just the individual body level particles. And the way knowledge is created as well is not just about fusion of an information. It's about application of an information and the particular attentional field provided to that information. That creates knowledge. Therefore, as humans, we have evolved to identify, distinguish the levels and adapt in the environment, sync with the environment, and go with the flow. Therefore, I believe in robotic applications, in a human-centric robotics, we have to design an algorithm in that sense. The algorithm has to look at the human as a source of knowledge and then make a decision for the robot that adapts, syncs with the human as a first step to do. Then we can start working on the collaboration part and the teaming part. So in this journey, I will explain a couple of other findings and perspectives I gathered, then presented to you through the YouTube channel like this. And we'll have a journey, long-lasting journey on this field. This is a famous bridge in Parsley Bay. Oh, it's a famous bridge, yeah. It's quite windy today. Hopefully the sound works fine. Hope you enjoyed this video today. I want to come to the Parsley Bay as it's a nice, beautiful place, and talk about the topic, quite important, that the topic that is usually misunderstood, and provide my thoughts about this topic. So finally, if you have any thoughts, idea, or any perspectives you want to share, please leave down in the comments below. I'm quite curious to see what you think, and like the video if you like, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one then. Bye for now.